Hi there, I'm Angela. Welcome to the channel or welcome back, and a special hello to any new subscribers. Thank you so much for joining in. Today I'm going to show you how I install invisible zippers by hand. If that sounds interesting, stay tuned. Couple of things before we get started, just a couple of things I want to let you know up front. I only sew zippers by hand when I'm doing an invisible zipper. Any other type of zipper, like a separating zipper or so forth, I'll do on the machine. And the reason that I sew my invisible zippers in by hand is I find that it gives me a little more control over the process, and I end up with a nicer looking end result. Now, that being said, I've seen some beautiful zippers that were installed by machine. It's just that I never kind of mastered that technique, and once I learned how to put them in by hand and had a good result, I just never looked back. It's not really that difficult. It might take a little bit more time, but I find that it's worth it. A couple of other reasons that you might want to put a zipper in by hand is if you're working with embellished fabric or very delicate fabric. You have to install an invisible zipper on that. It might definitely be advisable to do that by hand, just so you can be very careful and cautious about the precious, fabric that you're working with. Or another reason would be maybe that you don't have a zipper foot, so it would be very awkward to try to maneuver that zipper under your sewing machine presser foot. So a little bit of a disclaimer, I am not an expert at putting in zippers by hand or sewing even. Most of what I've learned on my own, either from books or from asking a lot of questions or watching videos. So what I'm going to show you is just the way that I install a zipper by hand. I've seen other ways of doing it, and as I go, I might point out times where this is how I do it, but I've seen another person do it XYZ a different way. So I'll try to point those out as I show you how I'm installing this particular zipper. So all that out of the way, let's get to it. So I brought you over here to my table, and we can look at my dress here. The first thing that you want to do, of course, is to press your hem allowance or the seam allowance there where the zipper is going to go, from all the way where the fabrics join up, all the way up to the neckline or the waistline, as the case may be. So I went ahead and did that, so I've got that all pressed out, and we will move right along to the next step. So the first thing that we're going to do is to pin our zipper onto the fabric. But before we do that, you'll notice that in addition to go ahead and pressing the hem allowance where the zipper, or the seam allowance, I guess, the fold over where the zipper is going to attach to, I've also went ahead and pressed down my hem allowance for the neckline. So that will help us with placement of our zipper, where the zipper will end at the top of the zipper, at the neckline or the waistline. So now we will start pinning our zipper onto our garment, and we want to make sure that we pin it so that the front of the zipper, where we have the pull that hangs over, is facing in the right direction, that we're pinning the zipper on so that the front is facing to the outside of the garment. So I'm going to go ahead and unzip my zipper. That'll make this a little bit easier to handle. And one other thing, one of the alternate ways that I've seen people do this, or the additional steps that I've seen people take or heard about, is that if you're working with a really delicate fabric, then you could also attach a stabilizer to the seam allowance of the zipper here, just to the allowance, not to the outer portion of the garment. And that might help you with this whole process. This is a rayon challis, and I'm kind of thinking that that might not be a bad idea for this fabric, but I've never done that before, so I don't want to start now. I feel like I've got to get moving on with this dress, so I'm going to skip that, but that could be an option, and it might be a very helpful and valuable step to add, just so you know about that. And another thing, I'm just using the standard invisible zipper. This one is made by Coats. I'm sure probably most or all of you guys have seen this in the fabric stores, this brand. So it's just your standard polyester invisible zipper. So I am going to start pinning now, and since I've unzipped my zipper, I have to reorient myself and make sure I'm putting it on face down. And you'll notice that the zipper stop is about 3/4 of an inch, I guess, down from the end of the zipper tape. So what you want to do is to make sure that the zipper, where the zipper stops, is where you want it to be. And I never put this directly up at the top of the neckline or the waistline, just because I usually will allow for a hook and eye to go there. So given that, I'll start at pinning where the zipper stop is about 3/8 of an inch or a 1/2 an inch. It doesn't have to be precise. It kind of just base that on your own judgment or trial and error or what you think. And if you're used to putting zippers in by machine, then you already know this, and you already have a preference for where you like those to end. So not too much more to say about that. So I've got it placed where I want this to stop, and I don't worry about this little flappy end of the zipper tape. That will get handled at the end of the process. So how it will look at the end is the seam allowance for the neckline will fold down over the zipper. And I have decided that I'm going to line this dress, so I'm not worried about raw edges too much. If I weren't lining the dress, or if I thought this dress was going to get a lot of heavy wear and tear, a lot of washing, I would go ahead and finish off my edges, but I'm not concerned with that now. So this could also, knowing how much extra allowance you have to fold over, that would help you determine placement of where your end of your zipper goes to. So I hope all that's making sense. I kind of feel like I'm rambling, but I hope it's not coming across that way. So now we're ready to start pinning. I'm going to make sure once again that I've got it where I want it to be, since I've been kind of flapping my jaws here and not paying much attention. So just to start that off, I'm going to go ahead and put a pin in there, and I might adjust that. I just want to hold it in place for now. Now I'm going to kind of, as I work with this, turn it over and work where I can see the front of the garment, like the outside of the garment, how it's going to look on the outside. So as I'm pinning this in place, I want to make sure that my fold of my fabric lines up with the edge of the zipper teeth here. And one thing I did is, sometimes I do this, I've just been seeing more about this, was to iron my zipper flat before I started. I think I might have only done that one other time, but I've seen numerous people do it that way. That's just where you unzip the zipper and you iron it. So normally the zipper teeth are kind of folded back on themselves like that. You iron it flat. It's supposed to help the zipper lay better. So I think I definitely decided to do it for this garment. So in case you're wondering if it looks unusual, if you're not familiar with that. So I want to say I did this one other time, but I can't remember on what garment. So I'm giving that a try again. So we want to make sure that the fold of our fabric is lined up with the edge of the zipper teeth there. And then I'm just going to pin it periodically. And I am going to baste this, so this doesn't have to be perfect. It's kind of just to hold it in place for the basting process. And if you're thinking like, oh wow, pinning it and then basting it, that sounds like a lot of work. once you get going on this, and if you're not trying to go a little bit slower because you're filming it and want it to be just right because you're showing it to people, you get to where you go pretty quickly with this. So I'm just pinning the zipper like that through all the layers. And how many pins, like how you space the pins out, is totally up to you. The whole point in pinning this is just to pin it pretty quickly, just so that it'll keep in place for the basting process. And I was a little concerned with this particular dress and zipper when I kind of dry fitted it earlier with the zipper to the zipper opening. The end of the zipper was just barely below the end, where the fabric joins here. So I was a little concerned about that. If I run out of zipper and I still have more like dress opening there, then I think I could pretty easily close this up about a 1/2 inch more where the opening is there. I'm hoping I don't have to do that because I just am in the zone now and I want to keep rolling with this and not have to do any extra steps, but it is an option if worse comes to worse. And I'm not sure if there's any benefit one way or the other of whether you put your pins in vertical or horizontal. I've heard it said that by putting your pins in perpendicular to the fabric crossways, that it holds it better in place. So it's not my normal way that I pin things, so I'm trying to retrain myself. And it looks like I am going to end up in this situation where the zipper, the opening of the fabric is below the end of the zipper there. I hope that makes sense, and I hope you guys can see that. So what I am going to have to do is to close up this opening there a little bit. And I'm thinking that I'm going to have to pause and figure out if I can do that later or if I need to do that right now. So after thinking about this for a moment or two, what I've decided is that since it's such a short difference right here, I don't know if you guys can see that pretty well there, what I'm going to do is to unpin this and slide the zipper down a little bit towards the bottom of the zipper opening here and make up the difference that way. I think that should be okay. And what I could do if that leaves me with too much unzipped part here at the top where the neckline is, I could, if a hook and eye is not going to be sufficient, what I could do is to put like a pretty white pearly button on there with a loop to close that. So there's always options. I find that there's always workarounds, but it just means that I need to now undo all my pinning. So I'm going to do that real quick and then I'll be back. Okay, so I'm back and I made the adjustment, slid the zipper down a little bit and repinned. And for a minute I thought about omitting that part from the video, but I thought it might be helpful just to show you like what kind of things can go wrong. And if I had been a little bit smarter about it, I would have started pinning at the bottom, but that would be after making sure that the zipper had enough length to cover the opening and not leave, to know what I would be working with at this end. So that's kind of a little thing to take note of for next time that I do a zipper. And then the next step is that you go ahead and close up your zipper. To do this carefully because now you have pins in place. So that could be a little bit tricky, especially if you are working with delicate fabric. You want to be very careful there, not to be too rough with your fabric. So I'm zipping that all the way back up. So now I am just going to pin the other side to the zipper tape and just work my way back up to the top of the dress towards the neckline. And the reason why I do it with the zipper closed when I'm doing the second side is that it allows me to know whether the fabric is in the right place so that the fabric lines up perfectly and I don't have any gaps or any overlaps. It's definitely easier pinning when the zipper is unzipped, but for the second side, it's kind of a necessity to make sure that the zipper zips so that you can make sure your fabric placement is as good as it can be. And one thing too is if you have a garment where it has an actual waistline, bodice and skirt stitched together, by pinning it, you are allowing yourself the opportunity to line those two waistline seams up from the left and the right perfectly. So that's something to keep in mind as you're pinning the second side. It gives you a chance to wiggle that around, it's a little bit of wiggle room or maneuvering so that you can match those seams up perfectly. And this fabric is pretty busy, so I'm not sure if those seam lines are showing up here where the waistline is, but I can see them myself, so I can make sure that they are lined up nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and continue pinning this side all the way up to the top, and I'll be right back. So I have my zipper all completely pinned in now, and it's not the prettiest pinning job in the world, but it's doing the trick. It's doing what it's supposed to do. So now the next step is to baste it. And the reason for basting is that it makes it easier to do the final stitching without worrying about pins. Some people might go ahead and just do the final stitching as is with it pinned in place. I like to be able to have the freedom of handling the fabric without worrying about the pins. And I'm going to flip it over now to show you the zipper tape. And that's much easier to see. When I baste it, I am going to just do like a long running basting stitch. And I prefer to baste this closer out to the edge of the zipper tape to allow me to do my final stitching, my good stitching closer into the zipper itself. So I'll show you that. It'll make more sense once I get going on that. And when I'm hand sewing or doing any kind of basting other than machine basting, I just use this cotton basting thread. I think I got this on Amazon maybe, or Wallwack. The reason why it's good for basting is that it breaks really easily. It's not super strong, it's just strong enough to baste, to do what we need it to do for whatever the project is. I know there's some good silk basting threads out there. I try to avoid silk myself if I can, so I found this cotton basting thread and it works just fine. It is a little bit thicker than polyester or regular like cotton sewing thread, so I do find that it can be difficult to thread the needle with it. So this might be a little process here. I might have to get back to you. There we go. I'm just going to make a knot at the end of my basting thread here. I've never been very good at making knots this way, but I keep trying because everyone says it's, so much easier. I find that when I do the wraparound technique and then pull it tight, there we go. Now that's like a big giant knot. For the basting part, that won't matter. I wouldn't want that big of a knot when I go to do the actual sewing of the zipper in. So I'm going to turn it around because I find I work a little bit better for whatever reason like this. And you can start at whichever end you like, it doesn't matter. And for the basting, so I'll kind of show you what I meant by basting closer to the edge of the zipper tape. So by staying closer to this edge, that allows me to have working space closer to the teeth for my actual sewing in. So you just go the whole length of the zipper with just a running basting stitch. And once the basting stitch is in, then you can pull out the pins, and this will be much easier to handle. With all these pins in here, it is a little awkward. And this is just the way that I learned it from a video that I saw several years back, and it worked for me, so I keep doing it this way. It might be possible for you to just not pin and do basting immediately, or to do the final stitching without the basting, just leaving the pins in. Either way, either way, those could be two alternate ways that you do this that would make the process a little bit quicker if you're pretty proficient with your hand sewing. I would say that I'm not that proficient just because I don't do it that frequently, although I do enjoy a bit of hand sewing every now and then. I find it to be kind of relaxing, and it makes me feel like an old-time seamstress or something like that. So there is that to it. I also can see the other viewpoint of ain't nobody got time for this too. So and like I mentioned too, the more you do this, and if you're not trying to explain it to someone, you can do this pretty quickly. It's been a while since I've done this technique, so it was almost like having to relearn it again for myself just because it's been so long. One other alternate thing that I've seen people do, or optional, is to take a ruler, like a long quilting ruler, and mark along their zipper tape before it's attached to the dress by pins or any other, while it's completely detached. They run a chalk line down the zipper tape to mark placement of their final stitches, like the good stitches with the good thread, so that it helps them to have more even stitching. And I just recently saw that. I've never tried that, but I definitely think that could be valuable, and I probably might give that a try the next time I do this process. I just was so anxious to get going with this. And one thing too, can be kind of difficult to stitch around all these pins, so that's another good reason to put the basting in before doing the final stitching. If I were doing my final stitching with all these pins in place, I think that could be not disastrous, but maybe not be like the best process and maybe not the best outcome. I apologize if I'm kind of going off the camera here. Sometimes it's hard to focus on what I'm doing and focus on the camera as well. I'm getting close to the neckline here. See, like there's a pin there that I'm trying to work around, and it's kind of a little bit annoying. And just because you have the basting stitches in doesn't mean there's no room for any more adjustments. When we do our final stitching, even though it will have basting stitches in, we can still maneuver the fabric as we go. And that's one of the great things about hand sewing zippers, for me at least, is that you do have that room, that wiggle room to adjust and finesse and get it just right, that I have not been able to do when I've machine sewn invisible zippers. So here I am at the top of my zipper, and I'm just going to pull that through and take the needle out. And I find that I can just leave this tail. I don't have to knot this end of it. It'll stay put. I'll leave a long tail and it'll be just fine. So I'm going to show you what this looks like with the basting in. Like I said, it's just basting and it's not, you know, it doesn't look great, but it does the purpose. So I'm going to do the same thing up the other side of the zipper, and then I'll be back and we can take those pins out. Okay, I've got all my basting in and I've taken all my pins out, and at this point I can go ahead and unzip the zipper so it'll be easier to work with. And my little issue I had down there at the bottom is fine now. So the zipper stops right there. There's no gap. It's perfect. Now we are going to stitch the actual, like the final stitching, and what I call the good stitching, quote unquote. And to do that, I've already loaded my needle up with the thread. It's just polyester thread. It's the same thread I've been sewing on the machine, sewing the dress with. And one thing that I have recently started doing based on things that I've learned is to wax my thread. So I have this wax here that I just got at the fabric store, and it has, I don't know if you guys have already, if you've used this and you know all about it, you could just skip over this part, but if this is new to you, you might find it interesting. So it's a little cake of wax inside a plastic container, and it has these little cutouts along each side, and the way that it works is after you get your needle threaded, you take it and holding the thread down on one side of the container, you pull the needle and thread through so that the thread is going into the wax a little bit. You don't have to dig it way down deep in there, but just enough so that it's getting coated with wax. And then you just pull the thread all the way through. I hope that's showing up. And then once you're done, you can set that aside. If you have to get a new length of thread at some point, you'll do that same thing again. Like this one length here is not going to be enough for both sides of my zipper, so I'll have to do that again. So I've done that a number of times when I've hand sewn things, and it's supposed to make the thread stronger and sturdier. But what I wasn't doing was, after waxing the thread, giving it a good iron, and it helps like seal that wax into the thread. So I'm going to try that this time with my thread here. And what I read, in order to avoid getting wax all over your iron and maybe your ironing mat, that you could iron the thread holding it down in between, like sandwiching it between sheets of paper or in between a pressing cloth. And I have a little pressing cloth here, so I'm just going to use that. And I think that will take the whole process of waxing your thread like one step further. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And it just occurred to me, you can wax your thread before the needle's threaded. It might actually be better to do it that way. I'm not sure. My iron is kind of cooled off a little bit, so we'll let that heat back up. It helps also, in addition to making your thread stronger, it really does help keep it from tangling up as you're sewing, and I have seen that like firsthand myself. So there's that. So it's taking its own sweet time to heat back up. I've had this iron for quite a while. I might have to get back to you on this after I've ironed my waxed thread. No, there we go. It's warm now. So I've just got the thread sandwiched in between this pressing cloth, ironing it, and I'll just bring the next length up and do the same thing again. Yeah, I'll be interested to see if this makes even bigger of a difference using waxed thread that's been pressed. So there's always something new to learn in sewing, isn't there? It's kind of one of the things that I love about it. Some things don't change, and then some things there's always a better way. So what I'm going to do here is to make another knot at the end of my thread. I'm ready to start stitching. And because my little wraparound finger trick doesn't really work out for me like it does for everyone else on the internet, I kind of do this the old-fashioned way. If you guys have any helpful pointers for me on that, I would love to know about them. It was okay for the basting thread, but it made like a very large, unsightly kind of knot, and I'd rather, for this permanent thread that's going to stay in there, just to have like a smaller, delicate knot. And this does take a little bit more time than the finger twisty thing, but I get a better result with it. So I know that it's just probably something I'm doing wrong. So there we go. And if you guys have, no, that's showing up. Doesn't seem like it's showing up very well. It's a big enough knot, it won't go through the fabric and it'll be secure. At least I think so. And if it goes through the fabric, I'll just make a bigger knot. So getting back to our zipper, I always start at the bottom where the fabric opens up when I do this. From the back side, what you want to do is anywhere down near the bottom of the zipper that's below, like I've got the zipper open all the way up. So I want to insert my needle for the first time anywhere at the bottom of that. And at this point, I do not want to catch my fashion fabric. So I'm going in between the hem allowance and the fashion fabric there. So I just bring it up through the zipper tape. And yeah, sure enough, the knot works. And if I wanted to make extra sure, which sometimes I be a little bit overboard with these knotting situations, I can also do another little knot here. That way we know for sure it's not going to go anywhere. Of course, now I've jammed up my thread, so maybe that wasn't the best idea after all. So because of my little snafu there, I'm going to just give it another little knot just to make absolutely sure. A little bit more carefully this time. You guys are getting to see all the things that can go wrong. So at this point, what we're going to do along the whole length of the zipper tape is do a tiny little back stitch. And I'm not like an expert with all the different types of hand stitches. I've heard it called a prick stitch or a pick stitch even, but what it amounts to is that it's a tiny little back stitch. And as I'm going, even though I have my fabric, it was carefully placed over the zipper tape and I basted it in, I still want to keep an eye and make sure that it's where it needs to be as I'm putting this permanent stitching in. So this is a good chance to allow us to do that. So I want my stitches to be about a 1/4 inch apart from each other, and as far as where I'm placing them on the zipper tape, about 1/8 of an inch away from the zipper teeth. That can be, that doesn't have to be precise, but what you do want to shoot for as far as precision is once you decide on a distance to keep that pretty consistent, and if possible to keep the distance between your stitches standard as well, consistency. You'll end up with a better looking product. So I want to go into all 3 layers, the zipper tape, the seam allowance, and the outer edge, the outer garment fabric with my needle, and come back through. And so what it looks like on the outside, you can see the needle, I hope that's showing up right there. You're only catching a couple of threads of the outer garment fabric. If you guys can see where the needle is right there. So as much of that needle that's showing, that's how much of your thread will be showing. So just keep that in mind. So pull that through. Now I want to go into the fabric a 1/4 inch away from that first stitch. And this thread is matching the zipper tape pretty much exactly. So it's even kind of hard for me to see where I went in that first stitch. So you go in, catch a few threads, and it may be helpful, and I still do this, is to turn it over to make sure, one, that your needle went into the fashion fabric on the outside of the garment, and 2, that you only caught a couple of threads and you're not going to have a big unsightly stitch there. And if you're not used to hand stitching like I am not, because I don't do a lot of it, every time I do this process, it really takes me a minute to kind of get into the groove and find a rhythm, and to find the best way to hold the garment and the best way to direction to run the stitches. Once I get that groove going though, I really like it. I find it to be kind of relaxing and enjoyable. So got my second stitch in, and you just keep going down the length of the zipper, making these tiny little back stitches that are evenly spaced as much as possible. And you can always flip the garment over to see how much of your needle is showing. And it's a good chance to be checking that your fabric placement is still good. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on with this, just making these tiny little back stitches all down the length of the zipper, and then I'll show you what it looks like in the end. So I'll be back. I finished my first side stitching, and overall I'm pretty happy with it. It looks pretty good. You guys can see, I'm trying to get some better light. I moved over here to my desk where maybe the lighting is a little bit better. So you can kind of see where the tiny little stitches, they do show. That's why you have to be careful to only pick up 1 or 2 threads on the front side or the outer side of the garment. There are a few stitches that I'm not real happy with. They came out a little bit larger, and I think that's a result of I'm still not feeling 100% and just trying to hurry and get through with this because I feel like I need to rest. So it's not my best one ever, but it is good enough for me and for what it is. If this was a fancy like dress or gown, I would definitely put more like 110% effort into this. So you can also see on the back side of the zipper tape, that's where the stitches show up more because it is a back stitch. And what's remaining now is to do the same thing to the other side, which is still got its basting stitches in. I do overall like the outcome of hand installing a zipper. Like I pointed out on this garment, there are a few stitches that I'm really not proud of, and I would rather not be seen. But I'm not wearing this dress to a wedding or anything like that, or a ball or something like that. It'll just be a nice little summer dress that I wear out and about. And if a couple of the stitches show, I'm not going to be that concerned about. There have been garments in the past where if I would have done that quality of work just because I was feeling poorly or too tired and it should have waited to put the zipper in, I probably would unpick it and do it again. you know, that all just depends on what I'm going for, the nature of the garment and the intended use of the garment and the wear. One thing I will tell you though is that printed fabric definitely are more forgiving than a solid. If you were doing this hand-picked zipper on a solid fabric, you definitely would have to be more mindful of stitches showing on the outside or like the facing side of the garment, what you'll see when you're wearing it, or I guess more specifically what other people will see as you're wearing it. And if I had the knack or the ability or the skill to just quickly whip up an invisible zipper on the machine into this dress, I would have done that. And maybe that's just something that I need to practice a little bit more. I just remember before I started doing hand sewn zippers, I never really could get the knack of doing a good invisible zipper by machine. It never turned out that well. So that's the main reason why I do hand sewn zippers. Plus it is kind of fun to do a little bit of hand sewing every now and then. I'm coming up to the part now where I'm approaching the waistline, and what I want to do, this is my chance to make sure that the waistline seams match on the left and the right side of the garment. So what I'm going to do is to actually zip the garment and take a peek. And it looks like it's off just a little bit, so this is my chance to make some adjustments on the side I'm working on to make sure that they match. And what that means specifically in this instance is I might have to go ahead and remove some of the basting just so I can adjust this fabric a little bit. So I'm going to grab my little snips here and just snip the basting out there and kind of pick it out down here at the section where I'm working. And for all of you that do invisible zippers just fine on the machine, you're probably thinking, this is insane, I would never ever do this much work. I do kind of enjoy it. I wouldn't want to hand sew all the time, but I think every now and then it's actually kind of enjoyable to do. So now that I've removed the basting, I can zip it up almost all the way and make my adjustment there, and I'll just put a pin in right there. And this works if there's not too terribly much adjustments to do. If you were way off at this point and they didn't match at all, then you've got a bigger issue. It probably just a little bit of finagling or shifting is not going to do the problem and may actually make a bigger problem as far as putting your fabric askew and pulling on the dress and it wouldn't lay right. So just keep that in mind too. So I was just a little bit off, and just by unpicking that basting and just scooching the fabric up just a little bit, I've got my waistline lined up perfectly now on both sides. So I'll leave that pin in there for now and unzip so I can continue stitching. And I will leave that pin in there until I get past that point with my stitching. Oftentimes I like to sit here at my desk when I'm hand stitching rather than over at my sewing table so I can watch YouTube on my computer or something like that. it's fun to watch other people sew while I'm actually sewing. I guess that's kind of ironic. I suspect I'm not the only one, though, that enjoys doing that. So I'm getting close to where my pin is there. And because, let me get past this, feel a little bit better. Because I made that adjustment there, that might also mean that it affects fabric further on up. So that's something that I will have to watch as I go. And then the other thing to keep in mind too is that you want the other end, your neckline seam, to match up to. So what I'll probably do at this point is zip the zipper all the way up and make sure that everything at the neckline is matching up before proceeding too much further. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to continue on sewing this side, and I'll be back. Okay, so I've gotten my zipper completely stitched in, and it's zipped up right now. And I haven't done anything with the neck opening up here. So I will show you next how I finish that off. So I have my neck opening here. There's the inside. And I did actually have to make a little bit of adjustment here, which is not unusual. What it just means is that I had to, on this side, turn it under a little bit more than the 5/8 of an inch so that the two sides match up together. And this would be a good time to show you guys something that can go wrong, and this can happen whether you're hand installing a zipper or doing it by machine, and this is entirely my fault, and I'm just going to chalk it up to still feeling not 100% and just wanting to be done. That's an excuse. I wasn't careful enough, and yeah, so let me show you what happens. So if you see, looking at it, the zipper opening, I have the zipper closed right now, of course, it looks fine, looks pretty good, but when I open it, and then let me close it back up, there is a pretty significant overlap there. It's not the worst thing in the world, and I have pressed it down so that it lays pretty nicely, but ideally your two folds would meet right there. If, you know, maybe a tiny bit of overlap wouldn't be a bad thing. That way, if the garment's a little snug and the zipper, you know, the garment stretches a little bit, pulling at the zipper, that could cover that up a bit. But this is a lot of overlap, and it's totally on me, and it's not because of this technique. I've had this happen when I've done invisible zippers on the machine, and I've never had it happen this bad when I've done a zipper by hand though, and that was totally on me as far as not being more careful when I was basting. And yeah, I guess it's just kind of par for the course with this dress. It doesn't matter. It'll be fine. I think because I've ironed it down so nicely, when I'm wearing it, I don't think that there should be a problem with it. I'll let you guys know though when I get done with it. We'll see how it looks on. I'm overall happy with it. I think it's good enough. But let's get back to the little neck opening up here. So looking at the inside, what I'll do now is just slip stitch this overlap, the turn under for the neckline seam allowance. I will slip stitch it down to the zipper tape here on both sides. And after I install the lining, which will also be by hand slip stitched around to the neck edge here, and also along stitch down to the zipper tape and the zipper allowance of the fabric here. All of this, it'll look much nicer. And of course, when I get to that point, I will share that with you guys. I was kind of hoping to get away with not doing a lining for this dress. You might have remembered me say that from a previous video, but I really don't think that's gonna be an option now. This fabric is just fraying so badly, and I feel like even if I did some kind of a treatment to the raw edges here, it would just look atrocious, and I think it would bother me like every time I wore it. And same with like the waistline seam here. So definitely a lining is called for. So that's going to extend the length of this project. It'll get there, it'll get there. And it'll get there. We will finish this dress at some point this year. So that's pretty much all I have for you today. If you've stuck around this long into the process, I hope that this wasn't too painful to watch or to listen to. I'm still kind of on the mend, and I know I'm a little bit, a little sluggish, but that's okay. And I did not do my best work here today on this zipper, but it's okay. You know, I think it's still gonna look good, and I appreciate you hanging in there with this long drawn out project and watching me install this zipper painstakingly. But what I would like to say is that I'm gonna put a link to a video in the description box below that does by far like 100% better job than I just did showing how to hand install a zipper. The woman that did that video, she is a professional seamstress, and she does wedding gowns and things like that. Beautiful work. And actually her video is probably the #1 place that I learned mostly about how to hand install a zipper. Years ago, I read about it, and I did, you know, do it a number of times. But then more recently, I found her video, and I thought her instruction was spot on. She doesn't speak through the video, she just demonstrates, but it's not, it's still perfectly good. It's beautiful. It's a good video to learn from, even without like any words explaining the process. She doesn't need the words. Her video is that good, and her sewing skills. So I'll put a link to her video below, and I think you'll find that way more instructional than this one that I just did. Anyway, thanks again for sticking with me, and I hope that you're having a great week so far. And yeah, I hope that you will come back this weekend when there will be a Friday Sews. And I apologize that there wasn't one last week. I was really feeling it last week, but I'm feeling better. So thanks for everyone for all the well wishes. I appreciate that. And there will be Friday Sews this week, and I may or may not be doing the live chat. I have something going on Friday evening. So even if we don't do the live chat, there'll still be a video posted on Friday. So until then, and until next time, I will talk to you later. Bye.